So this is going to be interior gypsum board assemblies. Very often we get called out to do presentations not only for interior drywall assemblies, but also for Portland cement plaster, stucco, eaves, and etc. Usually when we try to promote the idea of doing gypsum board or drywall, we get, wow, that's the most boring topic I've ever heard. Well, you're going to come in and talk about sheets of drywall. That's going to be fun. However, and we didn't really get a lot of response, for lack of a better term. I kind of got a little creative about a year ago, and I changed it from interior gypsum board assemblies to cutting down on your punch list. And I know if anybody's had to run a punch list for interior walls, they can kind of sympathize and relate. So I says, how do you reduce the punch list for for your drywall? And so I kind of started to get a lot more traction that way. But I'm going to be rambling because I do that. I do have a lot of information, so I'm going to cut it short. Let you know that who we are. We are the Technical Services Information Bureau. And my name is Brian Stanley, and I'm the architectural specialist. And we've been around since actually 1962. We were originally called the Plaster Information Bureau, Plastering Bureau, Lath and Plaster Association. Again, started in 1962. We're a nonprofit. All we do is promote best practices in construction. What you see there is our team. Darren Coates is our Chief Executive Technical Officer. I'm the pretty guy in the middle, minus, well, it's all gray hair now, but that's still intended well. And then the real hairy guy there is our tech guy who goes out and looks at job sites. We are consistent again of this. We're not just the Plaster Bureau, however, that's why we're not called that anymore. We are the Technical Services Information Bureau, again, a nonprofit, and we're a free service to the design community. Why do we do that? We are funded by 4 union apprenticeship programs that we work with, and their goal, it really is to try to promote union construction. However, we all good and well know that the design community really doesn't have any kind of say so or input on who's going to do the work. So I'm a lot more realistic than that. Just letting you know, they pay me to go out and perform or practice, set aside details and specifications, review specs. If you have a substitution request, you can give me a call, and we're a neutral body. We don't try to sell you anything other than best practices. We do deal more than just Portland cement plaster. So again, we're called the Technical Services Information Bureau. We deal with metal studs. We deal with building codes. Again, gypsum board assemblies, what we'll be talking about today. Ceilings, fire and sound issues. One big topic that we're dealing with almost on a daily basis now is STC ratings. That's which we'll touch lightly on today. We're going to talk about, well, we're not today, but our main crux is usually exterior plaster and EIFS. We also deal with interior plaster, unfortunately. That's a dying art. And then another call that I get almost on a daily basis is how to deal with these wonderful energy codes that are really in almost they're being very pervasive on all of our exterior assemblies, and that's something that we have to deal with daily. So our outline to keep this AIA compliant, yes, you do get an AIA credit. We're able to do a little bit more liberties because, again, we're nonprofit. So if a certain product comes up unwillingly or unwittingly, again, because we're not a profit-centered group that AIA tends to, I shouldn't even say this, but it's all well intended, but we're not trying to promote any type of product if it happens to come up. We're going to be talking about products, types, installation, accessories, and we're going to be talking about levels of gypsum board finish and what's appropriate when you're specifying what you want it to look like and what are the levels of gypsum board finish. And if you specify a level 3, but you expect it to act like a level 5, well, there's an issue there. One of the things that, unfortunately, as a design professional, sometimes you really can't control. The job site conditions and challenges are the issue that can create the large punch list. You may be able to put it in your specification where you actually can, that you want to make sure they only install in certain temperatures. These are the challenges that we face, and we'll talk about that. And we're going to bring it back to additional benefits for gypsum board. And we all use it. What else is you're going to use that's affordable, economical on the interior walls? You could use interior gypsum plaster, but again, that's a dying art, and we're not really using that much like we used to use in the 60s. If you have a house that was built pre-65, you probably have gypsum plaster on the interior. And it can be very pretty, but it also can be very problematic these days. So the gypsum board definition, you see a picture of a wall that's been coated with drywall compound and is properly treated to receive some final decoration. This is the generic name for a family of sheet products. It consists of a non-combustible core, and it's primarily gypsum it's primarily just gypsum with a paper surfacing. That's what the ASTM definition of gypsum board is. When you are dealing with gypsum board, this is the Bible, the two documents that you want to refer to. There's two of them. This is what the California and the Uniform Building Code both reference. One is called the Gypsum Association Document 216, and then you also have the ASTM standard C840. And they're basically sister publications. They're very close. They have slight intricacy differences, but not really. But if you don't have a copy of either one of these, I encourage very much that you do have them. This is the standard for ASTM C840, and this is the Gypsum Association gypsum.org. This is where you can find this, and this is the GA216. This is where you can find it. Again, pretty easy website to figure out and find. It's gypsum.org, and they usually post out an update every 3-year cycle. They kind of try to mirror the building codes. Now the ASTM standard, that actually can change on a whim. And sometimes it's 2 or 3 years. Sometimes it can be updated 2 or 3 times in 1 year. So you're always having to check back. The building codes themselves tend to lag. And even though you might have the most current standard of ASTM, you still could be working off something that's much, much older than that, as far as an old standard, based on what state you're working in. Other key standards and resources to use. This is another one from the Gypsum Association. This is specifically about levels of gypsum board finish, which we'll be talking about in a little bit more detail. Another one that's not a codified document, so to speak, but a great interior tool to use. This is put out by by what's called the Wall and Ceiling Conference, which TSIB is a part of. We actually are the authors of this document, and it's a nice comprehensive guide between finishing gypsum board and painting. And usually you don't find too many resources that combine the two. If anything, you will have, I hate to say it, but in the real world, painters and drywallers hate each other because they pick on each other if there's an issue. If something goes wrong, the painter will say it was the drywall. If it was the finisher's fault, finisher will say it was the painter's fault. This document's a nice document, and it can be found on our website as a free download. I'll show you again where to find that at the end of the presentation. Typical characteristics. This is actually at the SoFi Stadium where the Rams play. If you've never been out there, it's just going out and looking at the architecture alone is fun. I tend to do that as much as anything else. I go out and I look at buildings as much as anything else these days. Not really interested in the games anymore, but I'm looking at how pretty it looks, the venues do. It adds structural integrity to the wall. It increases your STC ratings to the wall. It's additional layers of drywall. And when I use the term drywall, just keep in mind that the actual term is gypsum board. Drywall is actually a nickname. Sheetrock is a nickname. It's also called plasterboard if you're from Great Britain. These are all different nicknames, but the technical term, code term, is gypsum board. Adds fire resistance with additional layers of gypsum board, and it's recognized by building codes as an air barrier. Something else that we won't really talk about so much because it's in the interior, but you can actually provide an air barrier, providing all the fasteners and joints are treated. And the key, though, it has to be continuous. If you know anything about air barriers, that's that key word, continuous. Sometimes you can't get a continuous wall of drywall or sheetrock or gypsum board when you're using that. So it can be an air barrier, but how it's used, it will influence you. So these are the different types of products, installation practices that are out there. We have, there's a picture, this is actually LAX. This is the new Terminal 2. I think this is the Delta Sky Lounge area. Beautiful drywall ceilings there. These are the different types of boards that are out there. What we call a regular board. Can be anywhere from 3/8 to 1/2 inch thick. You have what's called a Type X board. Now, all Type X boards are usually 5/8 of an inch thick, and Type X basically means it's a fire rated board, and it's a generic term. You have also what's called the Type C board, which is just generally a 1/2 inch board. And for a while, it was one manufacturer who owned this Type C board, but other manufacturers also have what's called a Type C board. And basically what it means is you can get a fire rating with a 1/2 inch board, where before you did not, or you were not able to do that. A lightweight board is used for doing radius work, stuff like that. Usually for radius work. And then you have your water resistant boards, you have your high impact boards, and your soundboards. A soundboard that actually can give you a higher STC rating. These are all kind of be price points though, because they're going to be, especially the soundboards. Well, all these boards are going to have they're going to be a cost impact than say a regular 5/8 Type X board. But these are all kind of newer technologies. The soundboard products are becoming very proprietary now because STC testing is expensive, and you're not going to find generic STC tests anymore. So we're much more reliant on manufacturers giving us proper STC tests. And well, the good thing is that there is a pretty good variety of manufacturers that are making these soundboards now, i.e. National Gypsum, Pabco Gypsum, USG, of course, the Coke of the industry, for lack of a better term. Now they're all making these soundboards now that are proprietary though. So sometimes you just can't mix and match with all these types of boards. So be careful. Substrate requirements. This is just a kind of common sense thing. You want your substrate to be pretty straight, and so you don't have any issues later on. But this is right out of the ASTM standard that your framing members shall not vary more than 1/8 of an inch from the plane of the faces of adjacent framing members. I think that means that you want your studs to be pretty, even. If that makes any sense to you, but yeah, you want your plane or your faces of your framing members to be pretty straight. Therefore, your plaster, your gypsum board, at the end of the day, is going to be straight. If wood framing is a little bit different for obvious reasons, because it's a live thing, and it swells and shrinks and can be very dependent on humidity levels, but it has to be installed at least as straight and true as possible. interesting. That's actually what's in the standard as possible. So, realistically. The metal frame is great because you can do all these sorts of crazy, curvatures, and framework, and all this. This is another picture of SoFi Stadium, and this is all they're all getting ready to put a beautiful layers of gypsum board on the walls and on the ceilings. The installation. So we sometimes, very often, people will see, hey, it looks like the board is being installed vertically or it's installed horizontally. Either way is fine, actually, especially if it's an on-rated wall. It doesn't matter if the long edge is which way the long edge is. Both are fine. The key is sometimes when you're dealing with fire-rated walls, fire-rated issues. If this is the case, then you must follow the rating, the orientation of the wall of the board. And very often the fire rating, 1R fire rated wall will tell you, yes, you must install the gypsum board vertically or horizontally, and that needs to be called out. The joints shall be located so that no board joint shall align with the corner of an opening. That's kind of mean what you want to do is you don't want that board to stop at the window edge or the door edge. Your weakest part of a wall is always going to be at the corners of windows and doors. If you're familiar with Portland cement plaster and you know where plaster cracks, it's usually at that corner, what we call a reentry corner, because this is the weakest part of the system or the assembly. Same can be considered for interior walls. So the board joints themselves should not be lined up, except if there is a control joint installed right there at the corner of the window or the door. This is what a parallel ceiling application looks like on the walls, on the ceilings. And you can also see the wall on the right is a parallel application, and then the wall on the left is what we call, well, they're calling it a perpendicular, but they're changing that terminology to horizontal because they realize that it is perpendicular to the framing. So that's why they call it a perpendicular application, but they will be changing that to, I believe they're going to be calling that a horizontal application now. And so you're going to have a parallel and then a horizontal. So now that we got the board up on the wall, and I'm trying not to get too deep in the weeds, too deep in the woods, in reality, because a lot of this is mean the methods. So we're going to get straight to, these are just kind of the basics here that we're talking about as far as application is concerned. We've got the joint finishing, compound, and tape. If you've never been a DIYer, or you've failed miserably at being a DIYer like I do, and I should not be doing this for a living. That's why therefore I teach and not do, because if you ever ask me to finish your walls, you'll be very disappointed. So I don't want to do this, and neither do you want to let me to do it. But I'm going to get back off track here and tell you that you have your joint compound and your tape is put on the wall. And then they use this tape. This is the reinforcement that you're going to use. The tape here is what's called a paper tape. They also make a plastic mesh tape that is also used in certain situations. But for production, you're normally going to be using this paper tape. And then you're going to smooth it out. And this is going to be called a level of finish or a coat of finish. The compound is smoothed out and excess compound is wiped off. So when we're dealing with accessories, and this is the first example of what we call our technical bulletins. If any of you remember Cliff's Notes back in the day, we had these Cliff Notes when we were kids, where we could read a copy of The Catcher in the Rye in 10 pages. This is kind of a smaller example of this. We tried to give you a 1 or 2 page information bulletin, for lack of a better term, well, that's what we call it, on certain installations or products. And again, these are all generic terms, generic products. Here's an example of what we call a corner bead. And if you ever needed to know something more than just what it's called, these are the documents on our website. Again, I'll show you where to find this at the end. Fasteners, just so, again, try not to get too deep in the woods, but if you're specifying, just be careful. Make sure that you are specifying that any nails that are being used should follow ASTM C5514. If you're using screws, you basically have three different types of screws. You have what's called a type G, you have a type S, and you have a type W. And you can see they have different purposes. The type G is basically attaching a gypsum board panel to a gypsum board panel. A type S, when you're attaching gypsum board to wood or steel framing. And for type W, that's when you're attaching gypsum board specifically to wood framing. So you do have all these different variations. Staples can also be used, but not very often with gypsum board. It doesn't work very well with board, but it is acceptable to use staples. Adhesives you can actually glue, not very much wanting to glue the board to, say, concrete or brick. In fact, the industry is trying to get away from actually promoting that idea. But if you're putting two pieces of board together, or you're sticking it to wood framing, adhesives can be used. When we see that, you just make sure you follow manufacturer's instructions when you're doing any kind of adhesive attachments. Control joints is kind of a sticky situation, because very often when you have these really long corridors, in the perfect world, you should break it up and put control joints in there. And this can reduce any type of cracking that might happen with your gypsum board. This is the example of what it looks like. It's a simple, it can be a simple gap and a cutout from the gypsum board, and usually they'll put a vinyl or metal control joint in there to bridge that crack. And this is going to give you some relief. This is what the control joint looks like. It's commonly known as an O93. And this, what it does, it's like plaster control joints. It provides a certain amount of relief for you. This is right out of the ASTM standard, which is again C840. These control joints shall be specified by the architect or designer and installed per the plans and specifications. Sometimes we do get questioned, well, who's responsible to do that? The standard is pretty straightforward, saying it is the responsibility of the architect or the designer to do it. Another key feature is here, and this is right out of the standard, that your walls and ceilings should have a dimension between control joints does not exceed 30 feet. Now, I believe all of us can attribute or see a wall that's 70 feet, 80 feet, 100 feet long with absolutely no problems. And it's never a problem until it's a problem. But you may get a crack if you go exceed a crack of or a distance between your control joints more than 30 feet. And again, it's only a problem, and it's a problem. And if there's a crack that occurs, then there's going to be some finger pointing at the end of the day. Why wasn't a control joint put there? So just food for thought. If you've got a really long expanse, you can roll the dice and probably won't crack, but it may crack. And if it does crack, well, then there goes the punch list, and you got to figure out how to fix that. And that usually means installing that that control joint in there after the fact. If you have perimeter relief on a ceiling, you can actually, that linear dimension can actually go as far as 50 feet. But that's specifically when you have a perimeter relief for a ceiling that has gypsum board. Just keep in mind, if you have a full height door frames, that's actually considered a control joint. So if you got full height door frames every 50 feet, or I should say that, I shouldn't have said that, any 30 linear feet, then you're going to be golden. Corner beads. We always have to have a certain type of corner bead that's going to give us that protection on the corners. And it shall be protected with either metal, plastic bead, or other suitable type of corner protection. There's different types out there. This is what's called a clenching type of device. They also have a plastic version of it. I'm sorry, this is the clenching type of product that's used out there. And very common for production work to be done. And then you also have what's called a tape-on corner bead, where they actually tape it on the wall. These are all different types of corner protection that's being out there. There's a newer technology going out there called milled corners, where they actually can use a quote unquote milling machine. And it's actually a factory cut. You can think of it as a little mini panel shop where they can panelize and mill the corners and actually extend, build them in a protected environment and bring them out to the job site. That is coming on more and more popular these days because it's fast and number one, and for large production work, as an example, the San Diego Convention Center that was recently upgraded. That's all they did out there was they had all of these corners transitions from ceilings to walls, and they were able to successfully use these milling machines, and it was very productive and very clean looking. And there was very little, well, let's say wasn't a lot of callbacks on that job, and they attuned it all to the fact that they use these milling machines. So let's get on to levels of gypsum board finish. Now, they just say here that, oh, by the way, this is another picture of AIAOC Sky Club. Before it was done, obviously, they've got it all ready, taped and ready to go. They actually haven't, they're getting ready to put on the final decoration on this one. So these are the different levels of gypsum board finish. And because we'll spend a couple minutes on here. Here's like a quick snapshot of the different levels, and there's actually 6 levels of finish, anywhere from a 0 to what we call a level 5. A level 5 gypsum board finish is the best you can get, really, unless you specify otherwise. If you call out for level 5 finish, you can these are the, and basically what that means is the amount of coats or of joint compound that you put on the wall. It doesn't mean anything more than that. It's just a level of finish. This is what a level 0 means. Okay, they just installed the boards, and that's what it is. Temporary, not going to do anything to it. That's just the level 0. Without any taping, no joints, nothing, no accessories in the wall. So a level 1 finish, this can be used or specified in plenum areas above ceilings, attics, well, areas where the public isn't going to see it. It's just going to be one. It's going to be actually one coat of tape embedment on all joints and interior angles. 1 passage joint compound. That's it. And the material doesn't even need to be smoothed out. It's what it is. It's like I back up. Accessories aren't required to be installed, not specified. You can very well put accessories in there, but you don't need to on a level 1. In a quick summary, what it is all joints and angles and interior angles receive 1 coat of joint compound. And that's it. So we move on to the level 2, which can be typically specified for garages, storage areas, warehouses. It's not really a concern, but you don't want it to look, completely, level 1-ish, for lack of a better term. You want to making it look like a little better. The joints and interior angles have tape embedded in joint compound. And then an additional coat is put on the wall and that's a thin coating of joint compound over the tape. You tape the fastener heads and any accessories that are installed, and you get one coat of joint compound for all of it. So the biggest difference is that you're going to smooth out the joints, and you're also going to tape the fastener heads and the accessories. So that's your big difference between a level 2 and a level 1. It's going to be, in reality, it's just going to be a little prettier looking. That's all it is. So the level 3, this is typically specified for areas that receive a medium to heavy texture finish, or if you've got a heavy grade of wallpaper, wall covering as your final decoration. If you're using a real heavy, like, a heavy, dash or anything like that, or, smoothness isn't a huge concern, this is where you're going to be using this level 3. And, if you're going to be something like we used to use back in the 70s when you had textures, we're all into textures. Nowadays, everything is smooth, but and you're only, again, you're going to be very careful. If you want anything that's going to be sort of smooth, you don't want to be using anything more than a level 4 finish. So again, if you're doing medium textures, heavy textures, this is where you're going to specify level 3. Basically, it's brought to a level 2 finish, and then they put an additional coat of compound on all the areas. So in reality, it can be a little confusing, because in reality, a level 2 is just two coats of mud everywhere. So instead of one coat cleaned up, you've got 2 coats cleaned up. And then we get to the level 4 finish. Now, this is where you maybe, okay, I'm going to do a little bit smoother here. I'm going to be putting a flat paint over it, or a really light texture, or a really thin wall covering as the final texture. But I got to have it pretty kind of continuous, pretty smooth. But I can't afford, let's say I wanted to do level 5. If I can't, and I should have added, all these are price points too. Because it's more labor. So the level 4 is going to take a little longer, and there's also a time factor too. When you're putting additional coats of material on the wall, you've got to worry about drying times, which I'll talk about in a minute. But so here's your level 4 finish. It's brought from a level 3, and then an additional coat is installed over the joints, fasteners, etc. And you should be wary that you shouldn't really not have a lot of tool marks or ridges available. The wall should be smooth and free of tool marks and ridges. So, however, a tool mark or ridge might telegraph. Talking about the real world. But you should be it should be a smooth surface regardless. And this is the summary of that. You have 3 coats of compound of all the joints, heads, accessories, and again, only 2 coats on the interior angles. Now the fun starts here when we get to a level 5 finish. Now this is specified where smooth wall designs are decorated with a non-flat paint. So if you're ever going to be using a non-flat paint, i.e. a semi-gloss or something that's glossy-ish, or you're doing a deep dark tone, you should be specifying a level 5 finish. Or if there is any danger of a critical light condition that may occur, stick with a level 5 finish. We're talking about critical light in a minute. So again, of a price point, this is going to be the most expensive because, again, additional labor step. But if you don't want problems later on, you may very well get a great level 4 finish because you've got an overeager finish contractor who wants to please their customer, the general contractor, and give them more than that was asked for. But then the general contractor will expect that on the next job, and then it's not a very good idea to be expecting things that in reality, well, level 4 finish is basically, again, coats of finish, and for a flat paint. Whereas a level 5, this is where you're going to be using when you have deep dark colors, or again, you're doing a semi-gloss or a glossy finish. All at level 5 finish is you brought it to a level 4 finish. Then you do what's called a skim coat of joint compound. It's applied to the entire surface. The misnomer here is, yeah, you have 3 coats now, but the thing is that's a digital skim coat. That one skim coat is pretty thin and can be opaque, because what they're going to do is they're going to apply the skim coat and they're going to shear it off immediately. All they're going to be doing is making sure, and really the level 5 finish, the skim coat is really to even out the suction rate of the wall. So that when the final decoration is applied to the wall, there is a even suction rate on the wall. You may be able to see the drywall being telegraphing through, but you will still have that coating on the wall. Now, they also do make a skim coat that is actually manufactured specifically for the purpose of a level 5 finish. Some contractors will use it automatically, even though it's going to be more expensive for them. Others will not, because they're the low bid. So then if you're going to be using a specific product manufactured, then you got to call it out in your spec. So you may or may not reap the benefits of having that additional skim coat, again, because in reality, Gypsum 5 is basically coats of finish. This is where it gets really sometimes difficult when the expectations aren't met. Again, if the expectations are met even with a level 3 finish, then there's no problem. But there always is an issue when the expectations don't meet what the customer wanted. Keep in mind, the entire surface should be smooth, but you'll never get a flat wall with gypsum board. Just the way it's installed, that you're always going to have that buildup of joint compound at all joints. But you shouldn't have any tool marks. You shouldn't have any ridges. And again, so it should be smooth, but it will never be flat. That's important to know. So where you're getting into the job site conditions and challenges here. Here's a taper here. He's putting cement on the wall. One of the things we're always asked, this is a document that is pretty common. A lot of agencies or groups have consensus documents of the same thing, and it's basically, if you ever wanted to know realistically what we say on how you should really judge a wall, this is the document, and another free download on our website. It gives you an idea of what you should be doing as far as a fair assessment of judging the wall. As an example, you don't want to be using an upright light or a floodlight to look at the wall, because all it's going to do is it is going to accentuate any kind of irregularity. The problem with looking at irregularities, I know for me, once I see something that's irregular, I'm going to see it for life. And I know that's kind of petty, but you're definitely going to see any kind of irregularity. And if in reality, you should be looking at a wall in real life circumstances, real life conditions. So one of the things that we always try to insist on is that the design professional specify a darn mock-up. We say this also with Portland cement plaster or exterior work, that have a decent sized mock-up that is predetermined, pre-accepted at the beginning of the job, that it doesn't go anywhere, because if there is a problem later on, and there is a punch list. If you call out somebody like me to say, hey, can you look at this? What do you think? The first thing we're gonna want to do is look at the mock-up, because that's going to tell us what the expectation was. What was the approved expectation? So if the end result is different than the mock-up, then obviously there's an issue, and it gives you, the design professional, a lot of, for lack of a better term, some legs to stand on. You know, if there isn't a mock-up or something is different, then that's where it gets a little bit more dicey, more difficult to, for lack of a better term, defend your stance that it's not meeting your expectations. So the mock-up is very, very important. It can be part of the completed work. Very commonly, if it's a large project, like a condo project, one room is dedicated to the mock-up. So anytime there's an aesthetic issue, we can always go back to that one completed room that everybody agreed was the mock-up, and that's going to give you again some legs to stand on. If not, then the mock-up should be large enough to represent the specified level of finish. Using a 2 foot by 2 foot piece of a wall sample is not going to give you a proper representation of what the wall is going to look like. It's great for color. It's great to again, maybe also if you're doing a texture. The larger the sample, the larger the markup, the better. Because anytime you're using a texture, you want that sample or that mock-up to be as large as possible. When you're evaluating a mock-up, a normal viewing position, how are you going to look at it every day of the week? Are you going to be 6 inches from the wall? Now, I personally do get 6 inches from the wall when I look at a wall because, well, number one, I'm blind. But number two, because I like to taste it. No, I'm kidding. But you know, we actually are looking for issues. But in reality, if you want to look at a wall, then a normal viewing position is how you should be evaluating. Environmental conditions. So this is another big thing, a big problem, or something that can affect a punch list or affect cracking. It can affect issues that hopefully we could avoid. But one of the things is that on the environmental issues, and this should be specified, that in reality, temperature and relative humidity can play a big part during the application process of the wall. As an example, when you're applying the board itself, the interior environment should never be cooler than 50 degrees. It should be 50 degrees or more. And that's the same case for when you're installing the drywall mud and the taping. You want to make sure that the wall is warm enough. But Sam, one of the things that can very obviously affect the outcome is relative humidity. And this all has to do with drying times. And this is what we call a drying time for what we consider our production drying regular joint compound that will be used on basically most commercial production jobs. Now they make a setting type of compound that dries much quicker, but it's a price point, and you have a large project. Normally, somebody is not going to be using a setting type of compound. They're going to be using a drying type of compound, and the whole thing is you want to make sure that the joint compound is completely dry before you put the next coat on the wall. As an example, this is the drying chart on the back side of this technical bulletin that I just showed you. I'll back up. This is 30.12. This drying chart is actually a codified chart. As an example, when you say, for instance, where you have a 70 degree atmosphere, and which is perfect. It's a bit 2 degrees colder than my wife likes it, but she likes it at 72. But so we're working, we got 70 degrees Fahrenheit. If we look at this chart, and let's say, for instance, outside the relative humidity is 60% humidity. If I use this chart, that tells me that that coat of drywall mud is going to take me 20 hours to fully dry before I put the next coat on. However, if that 60% jumps up to, say, 80%, maybe closer to the beach or something like that, that increase in relative humidity from 60% to 80% will increase from 20 hours to 38 hours. So you can see that's a pretty, that can be kind of a drastic jump in time allowed between coats. And not complying with that time can cause problems. So some food for thought, that to look at these drying type. These are some of the challenges that we have out there. So another problem that we have out there with the gypsum board area is not climatized. In this picture, you see here, well, the board was installed. What I mean by not climatized, you can see, I don't know, you can see that, I don't know if you can see my arrow over there, but this is open to the space, and which is okay if you're installing the board, but you should never, the process of taping the board should never be done until the building is fully climatized. One of the problems that can happen is what we call joint ridging or joint beating. This is another bulletin that you can download. And basically what that means is a uniform thin line can form along the center joint between the gypsum panels. And what that means is you get rising humidity that forces the board, because the gypsum board itself is hygroscopic and can, like wood or like plywood, not as drastic as plywood, but it can swell when the humidity increases, or dry out, which will cause it to shrink. That shrinking can cause that joint ridging to occur, or I'm sorry, the swelling of the board can cause the joint ridging occur, because what is happening is that joint mud might have been flat when it was installed, but when this board swelled up because it's more humidity, it just pushes the board joint compound out, and that's where you get that line. That's called joint ridging. Another problem is what we call delayed shrinkage, which is basically the opposite, where it was installed maybe on a very high humid day, and a few months later, say for instance, it was installed, say today, and then the Santa Ana's come along in October, and Santa Ana winds and dries everything out, and actually cracks will form because the board dried out and pulled apart, and that's what delayed shrinkage is, and that's also an unfortunate common problem that we have. And these problems are weather related. So proper climatization before, during, and after is key. Another thing that can occur, but it's not necessarily weather related, is what we call screw pops, where somebody will come in later on down the road, and you don't see the screws, but a millwork or cabinets are installed. And what happens is it actually pulls the drywall board in, but not the screws. So the screw or the fastener actually pops out. So when it was installed, it looked great. There's no taper in the world that would allow this to happen, nor would a painter do this. A painter would not see this pop painted, because he knows full well that it's going to be an issue, and he's going to be defendant number 2. So he wouldn't paint over this pop in the first place. This occurs afterwards, after everything is done, and then the millwork comes in, pulls that drywall, and that pops out. Critical light is another nemesis. This is where you can see what they did here is they used the low before finish. You've got the natural lighting occurring here, and it's just expressing or highlighting any inconsistency in the wall, unfortunately. Strong oblique winds, or I'm sorry, strong oblique light is a nemesis to a wall, not only with gypsum board, but also for plaster. And obviously, the smoother the wall, the more subjective it could be to critical light. One of the things that we say again when we're inspecting a wall is don't use a floodlight because it will accentuate a level 4 finish. And like I said, try to look at your final judgment after all the permanent lighting conditions exist. So you got to like this. Let's go back. Let's end this thing on a brighter note. Let's talk about additional gypsum board benefits right here. Here's a picture of a resilient channel. This is something that's designed to increase the sound rating of a wall. Sound transmission class. Sound transmission class, again, this is something that we're really dealing with right now because there's usually a disconnect between what's expected in the design committee and what actually occurs in the design community. And specifically when we're dealing with a lot of generic stuff, this is right out of a schedule that was submitted to a subcontractor. The notes said use all these partitions on your job. At the same time, make sure all these partitions have an STC rating of 50. This is the magic number. If you've been exposed to STCs lately, you all know this magic word 50 here occurs. And what happens is a lot of these partitions, if built the way it's expected, will not match this 50. However, in this instance, the contractor was responsible for all the engineering required for partitions. And unfortunately, in this, he didn't catch this during the bid. And so he was stuck and he got caught because he realized none of these partitions matched his STC rating, and that became a problem. So just kind of a real world thing that we see out there right now. As an example, we did some testing a couple of years ago on our own, where we tested some various wall assemblies, actually 5 of them here. And what we found was most of them, these were the expected design, numbers. Like this, for instance, this was expected to be a 50. When we tested it, it was actually a 41. So there was only one test that we did of the 5 that actually met or exceeded the expected design community requirement or expected design community STC rating. So there's this huge disconnect right now that we're finding sometimes. With fire resistance, this is great because we can always add fire resistance to our wall. Great thing about drywall, a lot of it is, I think it's 21% water. So the first thing it does when it gets really, really hot is the water itself turns into liquid form, and it can act as its own fire extinguisher. That's a nice thing about your gypsum board. Another book to have, or another source of information, is also from the Gypsum Association. This is the sound fire and sound control design manual, which will give you a lot of different types of systems and assemblies that are out there that all have anywhere from 1 to 3 hour ratings. Here's an examples of one here. This is a generic test. The only negative about this test is that the STC ratings are, for lack of a better term, are outdated, and a lot of the generic fire tests these days were done back in the early 70s. So it may not have a more representative STC rating in these books. Now, if they're called, there's also proprietary assemblies in here, which are probably much closer to the true sound ratings. Unfortunately, nobody's doing generic testing anymore, other than us that we did 2 years ago, because there's no money in it if you're doing it generically. So we're dependent on proprietary manufacturers to do these STC tests now. So a radius wall, one more thing, here's actually a picture of the Getty Museum. If you're like me, probably not. I go to the Getty to look at the walls instead of the other art that's there. I find the walls more interesting. So if you just a FYI here, there are charts out there that can tell you what your radiuses can be on your radius walls. There are different documents that are out there. Again, the C840 and the GA216, 214. Here's a screenshot of our website. These are 10 different documents that are all, again, free downloads. You can also find a copy of our interior guide on here at tsiv.org. And I tried to make some room or some time for Q&A, but this is actually a miracle for me that I actually stopped on time, because I usually go about 15-20 minutes over on everything. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for staying awake if you did, and thank you very much.